Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth, known as the roof of the world. For decades, it's drawn dreamers, adventurers, and thrill-seekers into its icy grip. But for some, that dream becomes a nightmare the moment they ignore the voices that know Everest best, the Sherpas. They're the ones who've lived in its shadow for generations. They know the mountain's moods, its traps, and its silent warnings. And when they beg climbers to turn back, it's not out of fear. It's because they've seen how this story ends. Today's episode looks at the tragic stories of 4 women who climbed Everest with something to prove, ambition burning hotter than fear, and ignored every single warning. Their names are remembered not for victory, but for what it cost them. This is a journey into Everest's death zone, where oxygen runs out, bodies collapse, and even the strongest wills break. And the deeper it goes, the worse it gets. Shriya Shah-Klorfine, the girl from Nepal who dared too much. When inexperienced women ignore Sherpa warnings on Everest. Shriya Shah-Klorfine had Everest in her blood. Born in Nepal, she grew up gazing at the Himalayas, watching clouds roll off their jagged edges, dreaming of standing on the summit one day. That dream followed her when she moved to Canada and built a successful life there. Eventually, she decided it was time to chase that childhood vision. She wasn't a mountaineer, not really. No high-altitude training, no climbs above 8,000 meters, but none of that mattered. She believed sheer determination would get her to the top. She spent her life savings, raised funds, posed in rented mountaineering gear, and told sponsors she was ready. On paper, she was a seasoned adventurer. In reality, she was walking into the most unforgiving environment on Earth, with next to no preparation. By the time she reached base camp in 2012, it was painfully clear to the other climbers, Shriya wasn't ready. She fumbled with her crampons. She struggled on the ice ladders. She couldn't keep pace with her team. Her Sherpas watched with concern, and eventually they stopped being polite. "If you go," they told her, "you will die. And you will kill us too." That's not the kind of warning Sherpas give lightly. But Shriya had made promises to herself, to her sponsors, to her family. She couldn't imagine turning back. And so, on May 18th, 2012, she left Camp 4 and began the final push to the summit, stepping into the death zone. Above 8,000 meters, the human body begins to shut down. Every breath becomes a struggle. Most climbers try to reach the summit in 10 to 12 hours. Shriya took 16. By the time she made it to the top, the victory was already slipping away. She had used up every bit of strength just getting there, and Everest doesn't reward that kind of gamble. On the way down, her legs buckled. Again and again, she fell into the snow. Her Sherpas tried to help, pulling her to her feet, encouraging her to move. But up there, no one can carry a full-grown adult. The air is too thin, the terrain too brutal. One by one, other climbers passed her. There was nothing they could do. Her oxygen ran out. The wind ripped across the ridge at minus 40 degrees Celsius. Her body temperature dropped fast. Her last words to her Sherpa were simple and haunting: "Save me." But no one could. By sunrise, Shriya Shah-Klorfine was gone. Her body was recovered weeks later and brought to a small town in Nepal, where she was buried. Her story became a tragic example of what happens when passion outpaces preparation. The mountain had warned her. The Sherpas had told her to turn back, but she didn't. And Everest made her pay the price. Maria Stridham, the vegan climber who wanted to prove the impossible. When inexperienced women ignore Sherpa warnings on Everest, Maria Stridham wasn't new to mountains. A finance lecturer from Melbourne, she had already summited peaks across 5 continents. She was 34, fit, strong, and determined, and she had a mission. She wanted to prove that a vegan could conquer Everest. It wasn't just a personal challenge. It was about defying stereotypes and showing that a plant-based lifestyle could withstand the toughest test on Earth. And she wasn't alone. Her husband, Robert Gropel, was with her every step of the way. In May 2016, Maria and Robert joined a large expedition on Everest's south side. Everything seemed in place. Experienced Sherpas, solid logistics, months of training. But the mountain doesn't care how much planning goes into a climb. If something's wrong, it finds a way to show it. Early on, there were signs. Maria hadn't spent a night at Camp 3, a step many climbers say is essential for acclimatization. The guides noticed she was moving slower, but Maria was confident she felt ready. On May 20th, they left Camp 4. The final climb had begun. Oxygen masks hissed. Headlamps cut through the black. At first, Maria moved well, but just below the south summit, things changed. Her steps slowed. Her legs shook. The thin air hit her like a wall. Sherpas begged her to stop. Her husband pleaded with her to turn back, and eventually, Maria agreed. The summit was right there, just meters away. But she knew she couldn't go on. It should have been the decision that saved her life. Robert asked if he should continue. Maria told him, "Yes. You go on. I'll wait for you here." He did, and that decision would haunt him forever. Robert stood on the summit, but all he felt was fear. Something wasn't right. When he made his way back down, he found Maria's condition had deteriorated rapidly. Her exhaustion was now something else, something far worse. High-altitude pulmonary edema. Her lungs were filling with fluid. Every breath sounded like drowning. The Sherpas tried everything. They urged her to descend quickly, but Maria could barely walk. Her pace slowed to a crawl. The oxygen was running low and time was running out. Somewhere on that frozen slope, Maria collapsed. Her husband stayed as long as he could, torn between love and survival. In the end, the Sherpas convinced him to descend. A rescue team recovered her body later. Draped in the Australian flag, Maria's dream ended not at the summit, but in the silence of Everest's unforgiving slopes. Her funeral back in Melbourne drew hundreds. Families, students, colleagues, all gathered to remember her. And Robert, he reached the top of the world, but lost the woman he loved most. Frances Arsenyev, the sleeping beauty of Everest. When inexperienced women ignore Sherpa warnings on Everest, Frances Arsenyev wasn't chasing fame. She wanted to make history as the first American woman to summit Everest without using supplemental oxygen. The year was 1998. She was 40 years old. Her husband, Sergei, was already a veteran mountaineer. He had done it before. They believed they could do it again, this time together. From the start, others warned them, "You're moving too slow. You won't survive without oxygen." But Frances had made up her mind. She wasn't turning back. Step by step, they climbed. Through the night, through the cold, through the doubt. On May 22nd, 1998, and against all odds, Frances reached the summit. No oxygen, just raw grit. She had done it. But Everest doesn't care about history. The descent is where most climbers die. And Frances was already exhausted. Without oxygen, each step was agony. She and Sergei became separated in the chaos. Sergei made it back to Camp 4. Frances never arrived. Panic set in. Sergei grabbed oxygen and climbed back into the storm to find her. Meanwhile, another team spotted something strange. A motionless figure curled up in the snow. At first, they thought it was just another frozen body. Then it moved. It was Frances, still alive, barely, lips blue, eyes half open, whispering, "Don't leave me." They tried everything, gave her oxygen, wrapped her in a sleeping bag, begged her to move. But she couldn't, not up there, not anymore. Carrying someone at 8,000 meters is nearly impossible. They promised to return, but they knew she wouldn't survive the night. Sergei never made it back to her. His body was later found lower on the mountain, a fall most likely in the blinding storm. For 9 years, Frances's body remained where she had fallen. Arms crossed over her chest, face turned to the sky. Climbers began to call her Sleeping Beauty. In 2007, American mountaineer Ian Wood performed a short ritual and moved her body out of sight, so future climbers wouldn't have to step past her. But the memory lingers of the woman who touched the sky without oxygen and paid with her life. Sunita Hazra, the lone survivor who walked out of the death zone. When inexperienced women ignore Sherpa warnings on Everest. Sunita Hazra didn't come from wealth. She wasn't backed by major sponsors or magazines. She was an assistant health officer from West Bengal, India, and she had a dream to summit Everest. For years, she trained, saved, borrowed, and prepared. Her climb wasn't just for herself. It was for her family, her community, and the dreamers watching from afar. In May 2016, she stood at the edge of that dream with 3 fellow Bengali climbers. But trouble came early. At Camp 4, oxygen cylinders went missing. There wasn't enough to make the summit and return safely. Sherpas warned them again and again. It's not enough. Turn back. But they had come too far, and quitting wasn't in the plan. On May 20th, they began the summit push, hours later than safety guidelines allowed. Other climbers descending shook their heads in disbelief. The delays were dangerous, oxygen was low, time was running out. Still, they climbed. Sherpa Bishnu begged one teammate, Paresh Nath, to turn back. Eventually, he did, but he died during the descent anyway. Sunita kept going. At nearly 3 p.m., long past the safe window, she reached the summit. Her camera didn't work. The weather was turning, oxygen was nearly gone, and the real test was just beginning. Almost immediately, her last bottle ran dry. Without oxygen, her body started shutting down. She stumbled, fell. Her face began to blacken with frostbite. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel of darkness. Her teammates disappeared into the snow. One by one, they never got back up. And Sunita, she crawled through the storm, through the cold, through the silence. Her hands and feet burning, her eyes nearly frozen shut. She dragged herself down the mountain, step by agonizing step. She hallucinated faces in the snow, voices that whispered to her, telling her to lie down, to sleep. She bit the inside of her cheek to stay awake, forcing herself not to listen. Somewhere in that endless white void, she lost all feeling in her fingers. Her gloves had frozen stiff and her skin had turned to glass. When her body gave out, she lay there for what felt like hours, too weak to cry, too numb to care. But something, some raw, desperate instinct, kept her moving. She clawed at the snow like a wounded animal, inching towards survival. Her own breathing sounded like a rattle. Her thoughts faded in and out. At times, she wasn't sure if she was alive or already part of the mountain. And then, through the haze, a shadow appeared, a figure, a hand, warmth. Rescuers finally found her collapsed near Camp 4, delirious, dying, but somehow still alive. They gave her oxygen, half carried her down. Every step a war to keep her alive. Her face was disfigured, her fingers destroyed by frostbite. But she survived. She lived to tell the tale, the only member of her group to return from the death zone. Sherpas had begged her not to go. Again and again they said, "Please turn back," but she didn't. And while she now shares her story in the media, her teammates remain frozen high on the mountain. Everest is majestic, it's powerful, but it's not kind, and it never, ever forgives arrogance. These 4 women, Shriya, Maria, Frances, and Sunita, all had different backgrounds, goals, and beliefs. But one thing connects them. Each ignored the Sherpa's warnings, and the mountain showed no mercy. In the death zone, determination is not enough. Dreams don't save lives, and the summit is never worth a soul. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories from the edges of human ambition and survival. And remember, sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is turn back. See you in the next one.